for today we'll continue the discussion of the Mahāsatipaṭṭhānasutta, and we're now at the midpoint of the retreat. So this is the point where you stop telling yourself, wow, I'm really going to practice well this retreat, I'm really going to get my head down and so on. And this is when you start making plans for what you're going to do when you finish the retreat. And how you're going to really keep your practice going after the retreat is finished. And it's not going to be like all of those other times. And you're going to find that peace of mind that you found on this retreat, you're going to keep it going after the retreat is finished. Here's a little secret. When you finish your retreat, if you can keep your meditation going just as it was on the retreat, then all that proves is that everything the Buddha taught is wrong. Okay? Everything the Buddha taught is about conditionality. So unless you're an arahant, then your mind will be subject to conditions. And when the conditions change, your mind will change. That's all. So that's why we come on retreat and we change the conditions to be able to support your meditation. Finish the retreat, there's another set of conditions. Your mind will change. That's just how it is. So the important thing is not that you're going to have the same states of mind off the retreat as you had on the retreat. The important thing is that you understand. Right? That's how your mind works. If you want to find peace of mind, these are the kinds of conditions that are helpful for peace and wisdom. Okay? And so what I would hope is that rather than going back and then thinking, okay, I'm going to keep my mind just as it is or whatever, that when you go back you can try to understand what are the conditions that's affecting my mind now. Why is it that my mind's like this? Why is it that it's like that? And so we get some clarity so that we can learn to understand these things. Anyway, so for today we're looking on to the observation of feelings, so the second section of Satipatthana. I'm going to endeavour, I'm probably going to fail, but anyway, I'll try to keep the session this morning a little bit short, since we're now in the heart of the retreat. It may be better to spend a little bit more time meditating and a bit less time talking. But anyway, we'll see how we go today. So, how does a monastic meditate? By observing an aspect of the feelings. Here, when a monastic has a pleasant feeling, they clearly know, I'm having a pleasant feeling. When they have a painful feeling, they clearly know, I'm having a painful feeling. When they have a neutral feeling, they clearly know, I have a neutral feeling. When they have a sensual pleasant feeling, they know, I'm having a sensual pleasant feeling. When they have a spiritual pleasant feeling, they clearly know, I have a spiritual pleasant feeling. When they have a sensual painful feeling, they clearly know, I am a sensual painful feeling. When they have a spiritual painful feeling, they clearly know, I have a spiritual painful feeling. And when they have a sensual neutral feeling, they clearly know, I'm having a sensual neutral feeling. When they have a spiritual neutral feeling, they clearly know, I'm having a spiritual neutral feeling. In this way they meditate by observing an aspect of the feelings inside and outside, and both inside and outside. They meditate by observing the reasons for the origination and the dissolution of feelings, and mindfulness has established that there are feelings to the extent necessary for knowledge of mindfulness. They meditate independent, not grasping at anything in the world. This too is how a monastic meditates, by observing an aspect of feelings. Okay, so in this analysis of feelings, now, of course, feeling in Vedana, the basic definition or basic understanding of it is not quite the same as we use the word feelings in English, but it's not too far different. But in English, when we use feelings, we often use it to mean emotions, which are quite a complex thing. Whereas feelings or Vedana is not really talking about emotions in that complex sense. It's talking about the much more simple aspect of things, whether things are pleasant, painful, or neutral. So whether we feel attracted to it, repelled, or neutral about it. And of course, the more sophisticated or high-level emotions sometimes are clearly associated with one or other Vedana. Okay, so you might have an emotion, let's say, of jealousy. Okay, which might be sort of clearly associated with an unpleasant feeling. Okay. On the other hand, you might have an emotion like, let's say, celebration or rejoicing. As you say, you meet some old family members or something like that, and you're so happy to see that. It's closely associated with the sukha vedana, the pleasant feeling. At the same time, you might also have other kinds of emotions which is associated with both pleasure and pain. For example, you might have see a photo of a dead family member, right? And so that might bring up mixed feelings, both happiness to remember them, but also sadness that they've gone away. So this is why those emotions are much more complex. It's kind of a higher order structure in our consciousness. So when we're talking about Vedana, always remember we're talking about that very, very basic. This is the first time we're looking at a mental quality, right? We're looking at one of the most primitive functions of consciousness, right? It's a function that you can discern in bacteria, right? I mean, you bring a painful stimulus to them and they'll cringe and move away. A pleasant stimulus, food or something like that, they'll go to it. So even at that very, very basic level of organisms, they have that same kind of reaction, painful, pleasant, painful, or neutral. Okay, so when we're meditating, of course, every experience that we have has some form of Vedana associated with it. Okay, often that Vedana is very neutral. Okay, so that's probably the most common one that you experience, really, is just pretty much neutral feelings. In fact, neutral feelings are so common that you usually don't pay any attention to them. Right? We normally only pay attention to things that are either pleasant or painful. So neutral feelings we tend to get bored with, we're not interested in them. So in our meditation, all of these feelings are there, and all of them will be part of the contemplation, part of that sphere of experience that we're having, and part of our understanding of how our mind works as our mind goes on. One of the things that we learn through meditation, in fact one of the primary things that we learn through meditation, is to get a little bit of distance from our feelings. Okay? So we can sort of step back from them, we know that they're there. So this isn't repression of our feelings, right? It's not dissociation from our feelings, right? You're fully aware that they're there, but you don't let your feelings overwhelm you. Okay? You recognize it as a feeling, you understand that, but your feeling isn't determining you, right? Normally often we react in a fairly unreflective way to our feelings. Something painful happens to us and we react. Something pleasant happens, we move towards it. So through contemplating feelings and being aware of feelings, this is one of the main advantages that we get from this, is that we get a little bit of distance. We see that feeling is there, we see our own response to that feeling, right? And we can kind of, through mindfulness, we can kind of step in and have a little bit of choice about that, so that we're not necessarily following our feelings, right? We can use a bit of discernment. Now, when feelings, Vedana, are presented in the suttas, they're presented in many different ways, and in fact there's one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya which starts out with these monks arguing about how the Buddha analysed feelings, and one of them saying the Buddha said there are 6 kinds of feelings, and the other one saying he said there are 18 kinds of feelings, and somebody else says no, there's 36 kinds of feelings, and you say no, you're wrong, and he says no, you're wrong, and so on. And they go to see the Buddha, and the Buddha says, yes, well, sometimes I talk about 3 kinds of feelings, sometimes I talked about 5 kinds of feelings, sometimes I talked about 6 kinds of feelings, sometimes 18, sometimes 36, sometimes 108 kinds of feelings, but it's not really worth arguing about. Okay, so these are just different ways of analysing it, right? It's all the same thing, but just different ways of analysing, which might have different purposes at a different time. So mostly, the most common kind of analysis of feelings we have is what I've mentioned already: pleasant, painful, and neutral feelings. There's also very commonly an analysis of feelings in terms of the 6 senses. So the feeling that arises dependent on the eye, the ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And then those can be further subdivided, so you have the 6 senses times the 3, pleasant, painful, and neutral. So that makes then 18, and then you can divide that up into past, present, and future, and so on and so forth. Hence you get the 108 or whatever. So There are some other places where the feelings are divided in slightly different ways, but these are the most common ones. Now, in the Satipatthānasutta, the analysis of feelings goes a little bit deeper than that, and this particular aspect is found quite widely in the versions of the Satipatthānasutta, and it is found elsewhere in the canon. It's not unique to this, but somewhat rarely. It's only found a few places elsewhere in the canon. And we can see the main distinction here is the distinction between what I've translated as sensual feelings and spiritual feelings. The Pali words here are, for what I've translated as sensual, is actually amisa, which is actually associated for a word meaning something like raw meat. So more literally you translate it as carnal feelings. Okay? Carnal feelings. But I was kind of wrestling with that. To translate it as carnal feelings is tempting because it's quite precise and quite, etymologically literal as well, but it's probably a bit archaic. And then the other word is the opposite of that, so it's literally uncarnal feelings, niramisa, so we translate it as spiritual feelings. And so these sensual feelings and spiritual feelings, one way of looking at them is that they're feelings which tend to lead towards suffering and feelings which tend to lead towards liberation from suffering. Okay, so the interesting part about it is that the spiritual feelings, which are the feelings to be developed, can be either pleasant, painful, or neutral, as can the sensual feelings or the worldly feelings. They also can be painful, pleasant, or neutral. So we can't say that it's not the case that pleasant feeling is always good or the painful feeling is always bad or vice versa. Actually, all three of those feelings can play their role. Now, in some cases they're fairly obvious, right? If we look at the sensual feelings, the amisa feelings, so sensual pleasant feeling, fairly obvious, right? So that you can experience pleasure through your senses, through eating food and having sex and all of those kinds of things. And so that gives you some pleasure in the moment, but it also tends to agitate and disturb your mind, tends to make you feel very kind of inflamed and very hot. Your mind feels very restless. There's never a sense of contentment with that. There's always kind of you're wanting more. And so it gives you some pleasure and some happiness, but the pleasure and happiness it gives you is quite limited. And it always comes with a lot of drawbacks as well. So this is why that kind of feeling is not going to be very conducive to liberation. Then there's the sensual, painful feeling. Okay? And that's a bit less obvious. What do you think it's talking about there?
Addiction.
Addiction? Right? Yeah, addiction or I guess any kind of like depression or anxiety and things like that. Yeah, I mean these are things which are dragging you down. Yeah. Any other suggestions, thoughts? What about physical pain? Is that something which would be classified as like spiritual or sensual, or how?
Where does anxiety fit in? Is that not feeling?
Well, anxiety would be associated with negative, painful feelings. Yeah. I mean, but again, it's a kind of higher order construct, right? So you might be a person who's suffering from anxiety, right? But then you might also be able to have a laugh about your anxiety from time to time, right? So at that time you still have suffering from anxiety, but you have a pleasant feeling. But this is why these things, they're not identical, but it's associated with painful feeling. But yeah, so the painful feelings associated with anxiety, right? Because they tend to be associated with the negative mental states. Anything else?
I would guess that the physical negative feelings would be the sensual ones and the mental negative feelings would be more like spiritual ones.
So you divide up into physical and mental. Of course, there are elsewhere in the suttas where it does divide feelings in that way, right? So you have another division of feelings where it divides. You have like dukkha and domanassa is the physical feelings and the mental feelings, physical pain and mental pain. and sukha and somanassa is physical pleasure and mental pleasure. So that distinction is made. But if that was the case, okay, so let's follow that through. If in this case sensual painful feelings is physical painful feelings, okay? Spiritual painful feelings is mental painful feelings. Does that mean that if you discover that your boyfriend is cheating on you and you get upset with him, that's a spiritual sensation? Well, it might lead towards letting go, but but it might not be.
All the revenge stories that you're telling yourself might be pleasant for you.
That's right.
Spiritually, it's not.
Exactly, the revenge fantasies might be very satisfying. Yeah. Yeah.
Thinking of higher order mental negative feelings, is that what you define as spiritual negative?
We haven't got onto that. We're still trying to figure out what's the worldly painful feelings, the sensual painful feelings. The reason I'm asking the question, because let's for example just consider physical pain, right? I mean, physical pain in itself is kind of ethically neutral, right? I mean, it has a function, right? It's useful. You can remove yourself from a source of danger, but it also often tends to be associated with unpleasant or unwholesome mental states, right? When you hurt yourself, you tend to get annoyed or angry or something. On the other hand, if you're meditating and you experience pain, then it can be the opposite. It can actually be associated. You can feel the pain, and it might like wake you up, or it can make your attention become sharper, right? So you can experience a painful feeling, and actually have a positive outcome from it, right? Same thing can happen in your life as well. You can experience pain. Maybe you're whatever. Maybe to revisit that scenario. Maybe you discover your boyfriend's been cheating on you. You get really angry with them, and then you decide, stuff this, I'll become a nun. So, it can have a positive outcome. So this is the kind of the point. So what's going on there?
So, if you have a painful feeling,
Yeah.
and you have mindfulness of that painful feeling, does that make it a spiritual feeling?
Certainly helps, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah. One of the ideas is in the suttas that it uses is this idea of things which are like stimuli, right? Contacts and stimuli, which are trying to figure out an English idiom for it, but which are apt to produce a certain kind of response, or which tend to produce a certain kind of response, or something like that. And so, something like pain, right, is physical pain, is normally kind of apt to produce a response of aversion towards it. Right? That's kind of normally it's associated with the feeling of aversion towards the physical pain. Right? But of course, that's not fixed. Right? That's the point. And so, if you have mindfulness and you have some wisdom and you have some reflection around that pain, you can change your response. Right? So you can have a physical pain and then have a wholesome response to it, or a skillful response to it. Right? So this is why these things, when it's introducing the sensual and the painful and the worldly, the sensual and the spiritual feelings, then there's a little bit of wiggle room or flexibility about how these things are. Right? It's not necessarily that the same Vedana, the same feeling you have, can produce quite different responses depending on your state of mind. Yeah? And I'm sure this is something you've all experienced during the retreat, that these things change. Maybe the same thought might have come up, maybe an unpleasant thought came up at the start of the retreat and you were thinking about somebody like this or something. And then later on the retreat it comes up and you realise, you think about the person quite differently. It's quite a different emotional response.
So nothing's fixed, none of these, but they're all transmutable.
I think so, yeah. I think in a certain sense, like the physical sensation is, that's pretty automatic, but how you respond to it is
like training for Olympics, you have to go to...
Sorry?
Like training for Olympics or something, you have to go through sort of physical area, but at the end it is essential with your own sensual experience.
Yeah. But I mean, in that is a kind of mix, isn't it? Because on the one hand, it's about kind of glory and fame and sensual things like that, but it's also about like building self-confidence and reliance and so on. So it has a wholesome aspect as well. Yeah. So most of the things we do in the world are kind of like that, they're rarely, I mean obviously there are some things you can do which are entirely unwholesome, but most of the things we do in life they're actually like a mix of things. Yeah. So what about, so we've looked at painful sensual feeling. What about painful spiritual feelings? What does that mean?
Doubt.
Doubt? Okay, well, like what kinds of doubt?
Doubts about your practice, that it's leading you in the right direction.
Okay. Yeah,
I had that at the beginning of the retreat.
Okay.
But it's resolved now.
It's resolved now. Okay, excellent. Very good.
Just now.
Right this moment. Yeah. Existential angst, such as?
Why was I born?
Why was I born? What am I doing here? Why am I on this retreat? Sure. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Meditation.
Sorry?
You saw while you meditate.
Feeling sore while you're meditating, right? So you have those kind of feelings, and so you wish that you were free of them. It would be nice if you could meditate and not have any pain. Yeah.
I think some remorse, so it's kind of a little bit in the past that if you have a thought that, oh, I'm so healthy, I have so much of advantage, to make more effort, now and in the future, and then you have that remorse spiritually that, oh, why didn't I, back then, but then that can for some people, or sometimes in myself, you feel a little bit low. You can
Yeah.
turn that way.
Yeah.
I guess it's any form of greed, hatred and delusion really that you experience is ultimately a unpleasant spiritual feeling.
Why is it spiritual?
Well, because it's I guess it's driven by the mind, or I would say, rather than it's not a. Well, it's I guess I'm defaulting back to the uncarnal sort of. It's not of the flesh. It's pulling away from, or attracting from, or craving towards, or sort of confusion. All those states are not physical. Although they have physical expressions, obviously.
Right.
But, so I don't know if that explains why they're spiritual. It's certainly not physical.
Yeah, I don't think it means spiritual in that sense. It means spiritual in the sense of leading towards the goal.
Right.
Spiritual in the sense of leading towards what's skillful, what's wholesome, or what's free of suffering.
So this is like the
Yeah.
akusala distinction.
It's yes, very very much so. Yeah. In the sorry, Heidi? Yeah.
Taking that interpretation, so I didn't understand it before, it seems to have a much clearer purpose now in terms of the meditation.
Okay.
I didn't really get it before in terms of what's the point of this, but
Yeah.
that makes what you're saying, there's a big benefit.
Yeah. In the elsewhere in the Vedana Samyutta, it defines these terms more precisely, and it defines this particular term as the longing, that the sadness or painful feeling that you have when you have the longing, when will I experience that blissful liberation that the noble ones enter and abide in? And so that's I think very very close to what a lot of people have been saying here. Right? It's that kind of feeling, perhaps a remorse that why didn't I practice harder, or feeling to the future, when is it going to be, and maybe looking around the room and you see everybody else meditating so blissfully and so happy, and like, oh, how come they're all got jhanas and I'm still here struggling? And sometimes maybe you look back at your own practice and think, oh, I've been meditating for years and haven't got anywhere, what's going on? And all of those kinds of things, yeah? And so it can be quite sad, or maybe like doubts about your practice and these kinds of things. And so it's normal that these things are a part of your practice. So to me it's actually quite. It's almost kind of, I find that idea very reassuring. It's actually the Buddha's kind of recognizing that these things happen. And it's okay. It's part of your path. It's a normal thing, and you recognize that. And like all of these feelings, it's not a matter of getting rid of them or doing anything about them, but just accepting it. That's natural that you'll feel like that sometimes. And so you can recognize the feelings, you know what they are, but you don't let those feelings overwhelm you. Right? Don't let it turn into despair. It's okay to have some doubts. It's natural to have some doubts from time to time, right? It's normal. It's okay to worry, oh, maybe I should be putting forth more effort or whatever. It's natural. And the Buddha wasn't. How can I put this? The Buddha wasn't dismissive of people when they had these kinds of issues. I'm thinking of the context, like say the Kalama Sutta, where the people of the Kalamas say to the Buddha, here we have all of these different people coming into giving us different teachings, and we don't know which one's right and which one's wrong. And of course, that's something that's come up a number of times in this retreat, hasn't it? Right? People say, "Oh, but this, so and so is teaching like this, and so and so is teaching like this, and which one's right and which one's wrong? And what should I do? Are they all really the same?" And now I'm doubtful and confused. And the Buddha's response to that was, "Well, you're doubting in a doubtful matter." Yeah, that's a very nice response. He's not dismissing them, right? He's actually listening to them. Yeah, actually, it is doubtful. It's not easy to know what's right and what's wrong. It's not easy to know what's the best way to be practicing or what's really true and so on. And so it's quite reasonable to have doubts about those kinds of things. And so the approach we do with wisdom, if you have the mindfulness, you recognize those things, and then there are some times when you can reflect on those doubts and when you can overcome them. Okay. For example, sometimes you might say, okay, well look, I'm not sure should I practice this way or that way, and sometimes you can just reflect it and say, well look, let's give it a go. I'll spend 3 days meditating like this, and then I'll spend 3 days meditating like that, and then I'll see how that works. Right? You actually try that, and then at the end of it you maybe say, oh actually this one works really well, I really enjoyed that practice, so I'm going to keep doing that. So there are some times when you can solve those doubts quite simply. And so this is where we use our investigation and inquiry to overcome them. But then there are other times when we have those feelings and there's really nothing much to do about them, right? And especially when those things go much deeper, it's maybe kind of like an underlying disquiet or an existential angst or any of these kinds of things. And it's not so obvious what the cause is, right? And you can't just sort of reflect on it or solve it in any particular way. And that's also, it's okay. You just bear it in mind, you understand it, you know it, and you keep on practicing. And sometimes you'll find that as you keep on practicing that those things will drop away all by themselves. So however it manifests or however it shows itself, we're all going to experience those times when we feel those spiritual, painful feelings, and it's important to acknowledge that they're a part of the path. Yeah.
So spiritual painful feeling. So what struck me is I'm curious that the central image of letting go in Christianity, like Christ on the cross, it's crucifixion. It's a painful sort of. Obviously, there's liberation after when he was raised, and the actual act itself is quite painful. And like put forth right effort on the noble part, actually, in a sense, painful. Otherwise, being we'd all ordained and practice happily and that sort of thing. There's not really a corollary in Buddhist wisdom for that sort of idea.
What do you mean for?
Like practicing in the letting go process can be painful sometimes.
Can be, yeah. I'm not sure what you mean when you say that there's no part on the Buddhist path.
Simple? Like a simple part?
Oh, you mean like in the like the Eightfold Path or something like that, or?
There's no idea letting go is always presented as being an extremely blissful sort of thing, but actually it can be a painful process.
It's more complex, yeah. It is. I mean, it's true. I mean, in the normal kind of the sort of standard teachings on the path, you don't find that. But it is mentioned, a number of times, especially in the stories. You have the story of the different kinds of holy life, for example, and you have like the painful way of practice with different results. Yeah? So the 4 kinds of path is painful practice with slow results, painful practice with quick results, pleasant practice with slow results, and pleasant practice with quick results. So Ajahn Brahm said when he first heard that teaching, he was like, I'm going to do that last one. And so it is kind of acknowledged, that sometimes it's like that. And it talks about, with one sutta, it talks about a monk who every day gets up and they live the holy life with weeping and wailing, with tears running down their face every day, but they keep on doing it, And in the Taraṅ-Tarigata, you have lots of examples of the monks and nuns who are suffering from very serious despair. Got one of the famous ones of the nun who was like, here I am for 20 years, I've been living as a nun, and in that whole time I haven't experienced peace of mind even for as long as a finger snap. So taking a rope, she tied it around the branch of a tree, and she stood there, and as she put the rope around her neck, her mind was freed. Don't try this at home, boys. Well, I think if it's really right effort, I think it's very pleasurable. I think on the way to it, as we're purifying it, then it can be either. Sometimes painful, sometimes pleasurable. Yeah, I mean, we're all going to go through times when you're meditating and you're feeling really sleepy or whatever, and you're like, and it feels really unpleasant. But when your energy starts to kick in, it's fantastic. Yeah.
I find that quite curious. You have such a bad response to 20 years, and then suddenly you're completely enlightened. How does it work? Is it supposed to be a gradual process where you can see a consistent improvement towards something to some extent? Like, that's pretty extreme.
That is pretty extreme, yeah. In fact, that's very extreme. In fact, that's probably the most extreme story in the whole of the Pali Canon, right? So, well, what can you say? I mean, the mind is a funny place. Yeah.
Well, it took 20 years to get to that point, though.
It took 20 years to get to that point, yeah. Yeah, and she's like, I couldn't reach the higher goals of the holy life, so I was intent on the lower goals, fame and getting lots of stuff and... yeah. So... that's one of the things that's nice about those books, the Taraṅ-Tarigata, is that they sort of... See, when you look at something like the gradual training in the suttas, it talks about, sort of the lifestyle of the monastics, and it's like, you go for alms round and you collect your food and then you come back and after finished your meal, you sit down cross-legged and set your body straight, and then you like abandon the hindrances and develop the 4 jhanas, and then the higher kinds of knowledge, and then you see the 4 noble truths, and they go of all your defilements, and it's like, oh yeah, it's pretty straightforward, it's a, and so what those things show you is, well, it's like a, it's like a template or an archetype, and the reality of how people live that is very, very different. And the same thing you find in the Vinaya as well, there's lots of cases of, bad monks and bad nuns doing all kinds of bizarre things, and so, that spiritual life is very, it's, the way we actually live it, the way we experience it is very broad and very ambiguous and very complex. And so the teachings give us like a framework to orientate our lives within that. But the way we do it is our own. Okay.
I like when you mentioned about the word framework. Just put it in a practical way. So, because this in July, I just came back from, before I came to the meditation, I just came back from the company, from management and stuff.
Okay.
So we have to define our KPI for this year.
Okay.
For ourselves, for our team and stuff like that. One, like anyway, a lot of management and even self-discipline or self-management, if you want to put something, a goal, you use a SMART method.
Okay.
SMART, specific. Yes, specific. You want to be nirvana, liberation. And whether it's measurable, maybe. And then the A, is it attainable? Well, definitely not in this life.
Yes, it is. Of course it is.
It's possible, Bhante. It's possible.
It is.
Being practical.
No, I'm not. What do you mean being practical?
For you, maybe, Bhante, but for us, in this case, for me.
Of course it is. I wouldn't be teaching it if I didn't think you could all get enlightened. Why would I waste my time? The Dhamma is sanditthiko akaliko, right? What do those words mean? We recite the recollection of the Dhamma, sanditthiko and akaliko. What they mean specifically is that you can attain it in this very life. That's what those words mean. It's a fundamental characteristic of the Dhamma. And the Buddha said, I teach the Dhamma not for what you can reach in future lives, but for what you can reach in this life.
He also mentioned 7 days.
Well, that's right, the Mahāsatipaṭṭhānasutta. Yeah, 7 days.
7 hours.
Yeah, how many? We're getting close. Anyway, so attainable, we've got attainable. Measurable, I think it's measurable, it is. I mean, it's not measurable in terms of being like, I guess, quantifiable, but it's measurable in terms of the sense that you can see the results within yourself. Okay, formerly you had that dukkha or whatever, and you don't have that anymore. So yeah, you can actually see that. Yeah. So go on, what's the other one? Smart, attainable, what's next?
Forget the R and the T.
Realistic.
Which it is. It's this. And the T is the time, which is 7 days.
Okay, time. I mean, there are some people who take it very kind of literally, they come to the monastery and they're like, oh, I'm going to come and stay for a few weeks and get the enlightenment stuff out of the way, and then I can go back to work.
There's a book from, I saw in Catherine. One of the chapters, I don't remember the title, but one of the chapters saying, the enlightenment is a full-time job. Which really attracted me, but I haven't got a chance to read it. So I come back to my job and then...
But no one has any full-time jobs anymore, do they?
Full contracts.
Yeah. Okay.
With the story of the nun, I'm just wondering whether, do you think that maybe she saw suffering so intensely that that's what caused her to let go?
Absolutely, yeah.
But can you see suffering too much?
Yes. Yeah.
Where you're just really focused on suffering, seeing suffering in everything all the time?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty touch and go, right? Yeah. I mean, if her insight had been weaker, then she would have been finished, and that would have been it, right? You know, it's a high risk path.
What about compassion?
What about it?
Well, is that not spiritual conflict?
Oh, it's compassion. Can be, yeah. That's right. Yeah, compassion is an interesting one because compassion, you know, begins with an understanding of suffering, right? Your own suffering and suffering of others, as opposed to like metta. So metta is always focused on the positive feelings, right? So it's very, very, very straightforward, very simple. Compassion is kind of richer and subtler, and it always needs to go with wisdom. And if you don't have enough sort of self-acceptance, self-awareness, enough wisdom, then you know you can over-empathize with the suffering that you see, and instead of causing you to become freer, it can actually make you despair. And this is a very well-known phenomenon in like activist circles and things like that. They call compassion fatigue.
Will not be sadness anyway, even if you were moving quite advanced and mindful, you won't feel sadness.
Yeah, oh, actually, sure. Yeah, you can still feel sadness. Yeah.
So is that not the sadness in it with compassion? Is that not spiritual?
Well, it depends on what kind of sadness it is, but it can be, yeah. It can be, yeah. Okay.
Is it true that eventually compassion becomes sort of depersonalized, and it's just sort of, when you see suffering, you just see it as just a generalized suffering? So like you just see it as suffering rather than seeing this person, sort of seeing it in a broader, not in the sense of not feeling for that individual, but in the sense of seeing it in a broader context as just suffering as well.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Does that help you?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the story that's most helpful for me in that one is the story of it's an old Chinese story of the turtles beached on the beach. You know that story? A man was going for a walk on the beach, and then saw another man. And this beach, for some reason, all these thousands, millions of turtles had beached themselves up there. They're all dying in the sun. And a man went down there and he saw another man on the beach, and he was picking up the turtles one by one and putting them back in the water. And he went up to him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "You can't. There's like millions of these things here. You can't possibly save them all." He said, just thought about it for a minute. He said, "No, but I can save this one." So part of that, you know, the part of the kind of the wisdom of that is keeping some kind of perspective about what we can actually do, right? You change what you think you can change, and you know, so often we lose sight of that. Okay, keep on.
Can I check out my understanding? We've got that experience of seeing suffering or dukkha. Is it right that the dukkha itself isn't subject to measure? But what we experience as painful physical injury comes out of that point of contact. Because the contact gives, point of contact gives rise to the aggregate volume which is Vedana. So it's actually not the dukkha itself that causes the feeling to come, the Vedana, but it's that contact, and then the feeling to come arises.
I'm not sure what you mean by saying it's not the dukkha that causes the feeling tone.
Well, the dukkha is there regardless of how we feel about it. So the fact that the dukkha is...
dukkha is there regardless of how you feel about it.
Okay, I'm trying to sort of understand my own thinking on this, so I'm confused. So the dukkha is the craving for sensual pleasure, the craving for being, the craving for non-being.
No, that's the cause of dukkha.
That's the cause of dukkha. You're right. First note, which we backtrack,
Yeah.
Birth, aging, sickness.
Yeah.
And then the other three.
Yeah.
And then the 5 aggregates of clinging.
Yeah. Right.
So then we go to the 5 aggregates of clinging.
Right.
We've got this point of contact. And the contact is accompanied by that feeling from the Vedana.
Sure.
And it's that Vedana that's subject to the self-time. That's
Yeah.
what we're looking at that feeling to.
Yeah.
But our emotional response to that feeling tone, the sanya associated with that feeling tone,
Yeah.
is that where we interpret whether it's suffering or not?
I don't know.
Well, keep going stupid one if you want, because that would be as helpful.
No, that probably would be not my style, really.
That's fine. Just sticking there.
Yeah, and
I'm just trying to link this back to this very specific Satipatthana because the instructions are very clear
right.
in this mindfulness of that feeling tone.
Yeah.
And Vedana, as a source of liberation, is also clearly defined independent origination.
Right.
Because you've got the 12 steps.
Sure.
And Vedana is in there as a very specific step.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to kind of link the two together. Because you see something, you might see something as painful,
Yeah.
but you may not suffer as a result of seeing it as painful. You just see it as painful. So, I mean, if somebody pinches you, that's painful. But if you smell something,
Yeah.
the smell does not, as far as I can see, inherently have feeling tone in it. It's your mental reaction to that smell, i.e. what comes from the sanya, your recognition.
Well, I
That's
think
where the feeling
I think there are probably some smells in the world that would challenge that idea. I mean, all experience has some kind of feeling tone or some Vedana associated with it. Of course, there's a difference between dukkha as a feeling and as what they call like sankhara dukkha, or the dukkha of conditioned phenomena, right? So on a deeper level, everything is dukkha because it's not nibbana. Okay? So nibbana is the only thing that's not dukkha. Yeah, because nibbana is peaceful. Everything else is stressful because it's dependent on conditions.
But people live, arahants live in nibbana without suffering.
No, I suffer all the time.
So, wouldn't arahants, an arahant would have those same qualities of Vedana in the 6 that have just been described at the same time?
Except they don't have, the only one that they don't have is the domanassa, painful mental feelings.
So why do arahants, once they experience liberation, just go, oh, I'm out of here, do what some do, which is sort of build themselves on a feeling paths of life to it, just go, oh.
Yeah, sure.
So not suicide, but going, I just don't want to be here.
Spiritual suicide.
Yes. Why don't we continue to teach and learn about compassion?
Yeah, compassion and stuff, yeah. Because they're neither attached to nor repelled by the existence. They just understand it as dukkha. Like that thing that's very good to say, like a worker waiting for his wages, I wait my time. Yeah. But you know, when very, you know, either arahants or very advanced monks or nuns know that their time is up, then that's what they do. They're not attached to life. there's plenty of stories about that in the different traditions, but when I was in Bodh Gaya a number of years ago, everyone was talking about this event that had happened like a week or two before I got there. So this would have been about when, 2007 or 2008 or something. And I was talking to some of the people there, and apparently everyone was talking about it, but like a week or so before, there was this Bhutanese nun, an old nun, who had been sitting around the Bodhi tree somewhere, and she just caught flame and burnt up, spontaneously combusting, and just, that's it, she was gone. And there was the police were called in and they investigated. There was no petrol, there was no matches, there was nothing flammable there, and she just went up in smoke. So that's pretty cool, right? That's how to do it. Yeah. So either she I mean, presumably, she was very enlightened, very advanced. I don't know whether she's enlightened or whatever, but very advanced meditator who sort of knew that her time was coming up. You can know that the sankharas are coming to an end. And then she said, okay, that's it. Maybe, of course, it's always possible that she was doing this Tibetan heat practice where they cause a fire and she forgot to turn the thermostat down. And but hopefully it was the former.
Did they find any relics?
I'm not sure. I think there was just, if I remember correctly, there was just ashes remaining. Yeah. But I'm not entirely clear about that detail, so it might not be correct. Yeah.
Well, when that monk hurt himself in Vietnam, he didn't feel pain because he was meditating and he wasn't, he was sitting there calmly.
That is fireable feeling something ritualistic. So
yeah, but I mean those things are very different if you're using external things. I mean, I can imagine that you'd feel the pain but not be equanimous about it. But if you're doing it just through your meditation, then you're in deep meditation. I don't think you'd even be aware that it was going on necessarily. It just happens. Anyway, so let's not. We don't need to talk about self-combusting nuns for very long. And okay, so feelings, we talked about the pleasant feelings, and then we have the neutral feelings, right? So you have the neutral worldly feelings and neutral spiritual feelings. Right? Now the difference between there is knowledge or awareness. Okay, so normally what tends to happen is with neutral feelings. In Pali it says adukkama sukha, neither pleasant nor painful. Okay, so to translate that more idiomatically in English, we use just neutral feelings. And because neutral feelings are kind of boring and we don't normally pay attention to them, right? The whole purpose of feelings, the function of them, is to draw attention to things that are kind of interesting, right? And so the fact that something's neutral is like, you've got a smoke alarm which isn't ringing, right? No one pays attention to smoke alarms unless they're beeping, yeah? And so that's the whole point of neutral feelings, is to be there and not be noticed. And so in ordinary life, that tends to give rise to ignorance, right? So I mentioned this idea before, that the different kind of feelings are apt to create certain kinds of responses. So the normal response that a neutral feeling tends to give is a response of ignorance, right? You don't pay attention to it, you don't know about it. But in meditation, we learn to pay attention to neutral feelings, right? And when you're doing like body scanning or moving your mind through different parts of the body, you'll notice that there's always a tendency that your mind will gravitate towards a painful feeling or to a pleasant feeling or something like that. And so you should consciously choose also to pay attention to neutral feelings, right? So pay attention to your elbow or to different parts of your body where you're not feeling anything in particular. And just spend some time looking at that, and you realise that those neutral feelings actually have their own particular kind of tone to them. It's not that there's nothing there, but it's just neutral. So through our practice, we can learn to make these neutral feelings conscious. Now, if you look at how these feelings tend to evolve in the Buddhist practice, you'll see that the neutral feelings usually become predominant at a very advanced level of practice. Okay, so that when you're practicing, initially you come from suffering or something like that, and then you develop meditation, you experience the joy and the happiness of meditation and these kinds of things, and then in the higher levels of meditation, you go to like the fourth jhana, which is characterized by neutral feelings, or you go to the fourth Brahma Vihara, which is based on equanimity. In the factors of awakening as well, equanimity is towards the end, and so on and so forth. So in all of these cases, the equanimity is like an outcome. It's what happens when the pleasant feeling becomes more and more and more and more subtle, until eventually that neutral feeling is actually more pleasant than the pleasant feeling. Okay? It's more peaceful. And so once the pleasant feeling, in a sense, has done its job, then the mind can rest in that neutral feeling, which becomes much more stable than any pleasant feeling is, right? Because of any pleasant feeling has a pull to it, right? It might be very subtle, right? But that's the whole point of pleasant feeling. It pulls your mind towards it, and because it has a pull to it, there's always a subtle tension in it. It's never completely peaceful. And so as that becomes more and more and more and more subtle through meditation and so on, the ultimate outcome of pleasant feeling comes back to a neutral feeling. Okay. So that's the normal way that neutral feelings are placed within the Buddhist path. Okay. Now, when we're meditating, of course, we can come from that perspective, of that neutral perspective or equanimous perspective, and we can do that right from the beginning of our practice, right? That we learn to have a bit more of a neutral, objective attitude towards things, okay? But just be careful about spending too much time there, okay? Based on equanimous feeling or neutral feeling, your mind will never go to deep meditation, okay? It doesn't happen. Right? Sukhupanisa samadhi, right? Sukha, pleasure, is the vital condition for samadhi. So your mind won't go to deep meditation unless you develop the pleasure. Okay? So yes, some periods of time when you develop those neutral meditations and just bare awareness and mindful and watching things, that's great. But also you need to develop those pleasant feelings. Actually, when you develop the meditations with the equanimous feelings, right, so you can mindfully observe your feelings and things like that, that helps you to develop the meditations based on pleasure, okay? Because it helps you to be more equanimous towards your pleasure, right? So the equanimity is also an attitude, right? It's not just a feeling, it's an attitude. And so you can feel the pleasure and you can experience it without getting too excited by it, okay? And of course, this is something that's very common in meditation. In fact, probably universal, right? You're sitting there struggling, meditating, all of this dukkha and stuff like that, and then suddenly all of this rapture comes, or this happiness comes, right? And the very next moment, you're like, wow, I've got that rapture, that feels really good. And you get really excited by it. And then you realize, oh, now I'm excited, my mind's not peaceful anymore, and the rapture's gone, okay? So it goes away. So that's one of the reasons why we develop that equanimity towards that feeling. Then when the pleasure comes in our meditation, oh, okay, that pleasure's there, that's nice, but you're not getting excited, right? You can be aware of it, and then when the feeling goes away, because it's impermanent, then you don't regret it or anything like that, but you learn to be able to develop it without being overwhelmed by it, okay? So this is two sides you need to develop, right? You need to develop those pleasant feelings, but we also need to develop the equanimity regarding those feelings.
Can you transform a positive feeling into a neutral, equanimous one?
In what way?
Well, say you're having a recurring thought that's distracting you from the meditation.
Okay.
Because it's pleasant.
Okay.
And it's essential pleasure.
Yeah.
And then you sort of work on that for a few hours or days or weeks or years or lifetimes. And eventually you find that you've got this completely neutral feeling about it, that you just don't feel pleasure or pain.
Yeah.
And that would be the equanimous.
That's right, yeah. I mean, and it's interesting that tends to be how things go, pleasant feelings anyway, right? That's why we have to keep on finding new ones, right?
Yeah.
All the things we used to find so pleasurable, you're like, oh, yeah, actually there's nothing much to it, you know? And that's just naturally, as you sort of grow and become more mature, your understanding deepens. So,
but it's a lot more conducive to a peaceful meditation. It's not samadhi, but you're having a peaceful meditation.
Sure, yeah.
I found that in my meditation in this retreat.
Yeah, sure. I think, Heidi, did you have a question?
Just quickly, can you meditate, so you're saying go from neutral to pleasant, what about from painful to pleasant? Is that likely to happen if you're using pain as a meditation object? Is that likely to go into rapture and stuff like that? Or you
Can
likely to go through an equanimity, like could that then lead to equanimity, which could lead to...
Well, mind's kind of complex and unpredictable. So yeah, if you have painful feelings, sometimes, yes, that can lead, directly to a lot of very kind of strong rapture, because you sort of, it sort of forces you to a big letting go. Sort of more normally, if you have some kind of painful feeling and then you contemplate it for a while, and then you get a bit of equanimity towards it, and so you can then sort of go on to develop your meditation. You develop the pleasant feelings in meditation, even though the pain may or may not still be present, but you can still feel the pleasant feelings in meditation. But yeah, sure, sometimes the pain will just lead to a big letting go, I think that's especially the case when you have like painful physical feelings which have an emotional basis to them. Right? And so if you're not necessarily like straight physical feelings, I mean it might be, but if you've got some kind of emotion that you're sort of locking up in your body or you're holding somewhere, and then you're aware of that for a while, and then suddenly the wisdom comes and you let go of it, then that can be a very cathartic experience. Yeah. Sorry, Kate was going on.
I was just going to say, can we use the meditating on neutral feelings in the same way, like with the painful feelings?
Sure. Yeah. The difference is that with neutral feelings, you have to like consciously decide to do it, because otherwise you'll just ignore them. With painful feelings, your mind tends to go to them naturally. Yeah. Well, either. Both pleasure and pain are like flags, right? So they draw our attention. But neutral feeling doesn't. Sorry.
Can you give us some examples of neutral feelings? What is actually neutral feeling? So we can identify easily what's painful, what's pleasurable.
Yeah. Neutral feeling, anything that isn't painful or pleasurable. Yeah. Like, what do you feel in your left elbow right now?
So just concentrate on the left elbow?
Yeah. What does that feel like? It's a neutral feeling. Yeah. And you see that unlike painful and pleasant feeling, neutral feeling doesn't stimulate any kind of normal response, right? When you pay attention to it, it's just like there's nothing there. Okay. But what's interesting about it, right? If you look, when your mindfulness becomes stronger, it's actually quite interesting, because when you look at a neutral feeling, what tends to happen in your mind is that there's like a question mark, right? It's like, what is this? I can't see anything. I can't recognize. There's nothing distinctive about it, and so you have this like feeling in the back of your mind. Oh, there's nothing there, And then because of that, the mind kind of wavers and gets bored easily, and then will drift off to something else. So it's actually quite hard to keep your attention with that kind of neutral feeling. But if you stay with it past that, and you just keep your awareness and keep your focus there, just keep watching, then eventually you'll see that actually it has its own kind of distinctive flavour. It's a neutral flavour. It's hard to describe. It's like saying what colour is white. Well, it's just it's just white. but it's got its own kind of tone to it. And when you can focus on that, you see actually it's kind of peaceful, you know. So even though it's neutral feeling, right, it does tend to stimulate either some kind of aversion, right, because you get bored with it, and you want to look for some pleasure or something. So you shift away from it. But then you can also see the peacefulness of it, and so your mind can be happy to stay there.
So it must be one part or anything?
Can be anything, yeah. I mean, it's easiest just to begin with by focusing on different body parts, but you can do the same thing with thoughts or something like that, right? So you might have like a thought, you remember something very stressful that happened at work or something like that, and it makes you very upset, and then you think, okay, well, let me think about something at work that isn't stressful. So maybe it's the doorknob to the front door of the office, right? And you remember that, and you think, oh yeah, the doorknob was just there, I never thought about it before. I've opened it every day, and I've never really cared about it. And it's just a doorknob, it does its job. And so you actually remember that, like a memory like that, actually also has its own feelings. And so you notice that actually we only tend to bring up those feelings that are either pleasant or painful, and we ignore all those other ones.
But you can only do that after you've been in samadhi, is that
You can do it anytime. Yeah.
Your concentration probably wouldn't be as good to do that as
Obviously, if you haven't been in samadhi, your samadhi is not as good. Yeah.
it's just not different.
Yeah. Okay.
How I experience this depends on what sort of state I'm in meditation.
Uh-huh.
So if you're in a state of sort of bliss, experiencing a pleasant feeling would be different. It's almost like, to use the car metaphor, it's almost like this is like looking at the map, looking at asking yourself, is it painful, is it neutral? It's almost like bringing some assessment into meditation, some insight into meditation. And I can be in a freezing car, watching the world go by. That's sort of a normal state where I might be uncomfortable. Or I could be a very cozy car watching the bright landscape going by.
Right.
And the meditation state gives me different insights. I mean, my mind seemed to do the last meditation a second time from a sort of blissful state where everything's the perception on impermanence and self-attachment is totally different. So it's almost like how we do these meditations is dependent on the mental state.
Sure, of course, yeah.
Meditation state.
Yeah.
And is that how? So if that's the case, then at what point do we bring in an assessment? Do we bring in reflection into the meditation? If you're on a journey,
you bring in reflection at the end of the meditation.
So it's almost like my mind just went in and did the body meditation on its own. And then at some point I was reflecting on the sense of inner and outer and the sense of self.
Yeah. Bring the reflection in only at the end. As we do in all the guided meditations, you set aside time at the end of the meditation for reflecting.
But your mind takes you on a journey, so then how do you go home?
Sorry?
How do you find a journey where you only by reading this, will this stimulate my mind to go into a full feeling and meditation?
Maybe.
And then afterwards I can assess it and have the insight.
Yeah.
From the perspective of this, rather than one cozy car rather than...
Well, hopefully, yeah. But as long as the car gets to the destination, that's the main thing. Yeah. So we're running a few people behind in the questions, and I'm just trying to keep track of who we haven't heard. Who is the next? I know, Peter, you had your hand. I think somebody else had their hand up before. Sorry. Anyway, Peter, go on.
Sorry, I just didn't understand you said that pleasure is the key to samadhi, or
That's right, yeah.
why specifically pleasure? Why is it necessary? Why
Because pleasure is sticky.
easier to get into a state of samadhi?
Not easier, it's only possible to get into a state of samadhi through pleasure. Okay? Because pleasure is sticky. Right? Samadhi comes from stillness, and the stillness comes because your mind wants to stick to something and stay there. So that's the purpose of pleasure. The function of pleasure in the mind is to draw your mind towards it. So this is what it does. It draws your mind towards it and it keeps it there. So when you're meditating, and the process of that meditation is that when in the initial stages of developing samadhi, that pleasure is drawing you towards it and draws you into it, yeah, and it sticks you there firmly. Okay. But remember what I said before, that the very fact that it has an attractive force, okay, creates attention to it. So think like a magnet or something like that. So the sukha is like a magnetic force that draws your mind in. But the stronger the magnet is, the more it will draw your mind in, but it also means that state is more tense. So what happens then, this is what you see through the description of the four jhanas, is that feeling of pleasure is becoming more and more refined. Yeah? And so eventually, it's as if you had like an electromagnet or something like that. You're turning down the voltage until eventually you can switch it off altogether and it will stay there. And in fact, it's even more stable because there's no tension. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Kim?
In order to get enlightenment, you have to practice neutral feeling most of the time. Otherwise, you become attached to like pleasant feeling or painful feeling.
No. Pleasure. Be happy. Be happy.
It's not the neutral feeling that.
No. Neutral feeling's alright. Happy feeling's better.
If you still feel happy every day and you still get attached to it too much.
Don't worry about it. Just be happy. See, you think of happy, see the face you just made. You're like, happy, and then I'm going to make a problem out of being happy. No, don't make a problem out of it. Just be happy. That's the whole point, is that in the sutta it says that there are spiritual pleasant feelings. Right? Those spiritual pleasant feelings are the feelings that lead you to enlightenment. And those spiritual pleasant feelings are the feelings that we get while we're practicing Dhamma. And those spiritual pleasant feelings arise because of letting go. Okay? You know, when we're kids, you know, one of the phrases we learn is it's better to give than it is to receive. Yeah? And of course, it's not really true when you're a kid. It's quite a lot better to get presents than to give them. But as you grow older, you learn that it really is true, right? They're precisely those two kinds of happiness, really. The happiness of getting. If someone gives you a present, you're happy to get something. But the happiness of giving is far more profound. That's the happiness of letting go. And that's that spiritual feeling. That's why dana is at the basis of the Buddhist path. Yeah? When you give, feel happy about it. Yeah? When you keep your precepts, all of those things, when you meditate, feel happy about it.
But isn't letting go is the neutral feeling?
No. Letting go can be associated with either neutral feeling or pleasant feeling. Okay? But typically letting go, especially, you know, again, like I was saying before, there's an evolution, right? But very often letting go relates to happy feeling. Yeah, because you put down the burden. And that's what the Buddha talked about talking about letting go of the 5 hindrances. You know, he says, you know, like just like a man who's been released from prison, then they would feel happiness and joy because of that. And that's that feeling of freedom and release. Yeah. So just be happy. Here we go. Nimi.
Yeah.
So, sorry, I missed that.
When your mind is very tranquil,
Yeah.
sometimes I can fall asleep. How can you avoid that?
When your mind is very tranquil, you don't want to sleep. Is that what you said?
I tend to fall asleep.
Oh, sorry, when your mind is very tranquil, you tend to fall asleep. Again, the real answer to that is development of happiness and bliss. When your mind has a rapture in your mind, then it will want to be awake because it wants to experience more of that bliss. When there's a lot of neutral feeling in your mind, the mind can be peaceful to a certain degree, but it can, if you do it too long or too much, your mind can then end up falling asleep. So if you find that's happening a lot, then the best solution is to sort of figure out a way to bring more joy into your mind.
See, do the right meditation, watch the breath, and then from the mindfulness, peaceful. Do I move to my elbow to get the neutral feeling?
Don't worry about it. If you're doing breath meditation, just stick with your breath.
So, where
Okay.
is this neutral feeling watching on the elbow?
We'll do a guided meditation this evening. Yeah? So that might make it a bit clear. We'll definitely do some elbows this evening. Alright? Do you have
Just backtracking to that neutral, which Olympic calls that blind spot. So the neutral spot's where the mind is subtle.
Right.
And then that's
Right.
the beginning of actually the mind training. Because,
Right.
Yeah, and then the sticky, can we also call that stickiness serving the purpose of maintaining confidence in the Dharma and faith? That stickiness and the pleasure
Yeah.
not only leads to samadhi,
Yeah.
but sort of locks in with confidence and faith.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these are all sort of emotions. We mentioned before the distinction between like Vedana or feeling and emotions. So confidence and faith and so on are all emotions which are associated with the pleasant feelings. Yeah? So the pleasant feelings tend to amplify them. It's not always the case, right? I mean, sometimes you can be a person who has faith, but you might not necessarily be happy at that moment, right? But the tendency is that it's associated with a positive emotion.
Yeah, I was just going to share this word, dispassion, which I've learned and which I found very helpful in this retreat because I don't want to feel the extremes of positive and negative feelings. I would prefer to have the equanimous.
Okay.
And so, for example, I have a partner who I strongly suspect might be unfaithful to me while I'm in this retreat. And instead of getting into the kind of heart pain about that, I've cultivated the dispassion so that I now think, I don't care whether he is or not.
Okay.
Is that an equanimous position or is that just an unrealistic? Like when I go.
Well, it's a very challenging one.
Yeah.
I can't answer that for you. It depends on your own particular situation.
Yeah.
I remember when Ajahn Brahm gave a talk a few years ago to the Sri Lankan community, and he talked about adultery, and he said, you know, if you discover that your partner's off having a dirty weekend, you should feel happy for them.
Yes.
You should be like, ah, sadhu, sadhu, have lots of good sex, enjoy yourself. And yeah, I don't think that the Sri Lankan community had ever heard of teaching on the precept quite like that before. So, yeah.
It's amazing what our minds get up to.
Yeah, it is. And with those kind of situations, you know, you're in a situation which is obviously very challenging and, you know, complex, and we need to be aware of not sort of being in denial about it, or not, you know, because it's easy to do, and it's easy to kind of just dismiss it, oh, I don't care, or something like that, and that's another way of kind of not listening. At the same time, though, it is actually possible to be in those situations and be fully aware and fully conscious, and also have that equanimity, and that's what comes with wisdom.
I won't know until I go home how I actually feel.
Well,
because I mean, I'm in a very comfortable position now. I've got people around me. There's a lot of affection in our cottage and support. And it's all very easy to think, oh, I don't care about him. But I think when I go home, I might not be quite so equanimous.
Well, you will have all of our
best wishes.
Best wishes and everything. Yeah.
Thank you.
Is peace same as an emotion?
Is peace an emotion? I'm not sure. Is peace an emotion? I haven't thought of that before.
I don't know
I guess
if it
so.
says peace is an emotion, but emotion is moving, peace is the opposite.
Maybe.
It's not saying it's neutral. Because you've got to pick on music, which is neutral
Yeah.
emotion, but peace is same as.
Well, certainly peace doesn't always have to be an emotion, right? I mean, you have like nibbana is peaceful, but it's not an emotion. But some emotions are relatively peaceful. It's just a matter of terminology, really. Yeah. Okay.
I'm still confused about, maybe I misunderstood, but did you say before when you're meditating on the breath, just meditate on the breath? In the sense that, like, the other day you were talking about how the pleasurable feeling should be eventually like unified with the breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so shouldn't you, like if you're meditating on mutual feeling, shouldn't you be unifying that with the breath?
No. No. See, in this particular, in the Satipatthānasutta, okay, when it teaches on the three kinds of feelings, right? Painful, pleasant, and neutral feelings, right? Now, in the Anapanasati-sutta, and more generally in the teachings of Anapanasati, it equates the four kinds of Satipatthāna with 4 sets of tetrads in Anapanasati. Okay, of course we only looked at the first set, which deals with the awareness of the physical sensation of the breath. Okay, but most of the time it also then goes to the feelings and so on and so forth. Now the interesting thing is that when it talks about the feelings in regard to breath meditation, it only talks about pleasant feelings. Right? It only talks about rapture and bliss. Yeah? So the whole painful feelings thing is entirely optional. Right? You can actually just meditate and only develop those pleasant feelings with the breath, and that's good enough, because actually it's just sankharas. Right? They're just conditions, so they're all in there anyway. So actually when you're developing the breath, of course, normally when you begin developing the breath has a kind of neutral feeling, right? But at that stage you're mainly focusing on the physical sensation of the breath, you're not focusing on the feeling aspect of it. You focus on the feeling aspect of the breath when that becomes prominent because of the arising of those feelings of rapture and bliss.
And then what so you do focus on the neutral feeling when
No, you focus.
Like body awareness.
Oh, sorry, yes.
The breath state,
something like that, yeah. Other kinds of meditation, then you can develop that awareness specifically of neutral feeling. We'll do a guided meditation on that this evening. Okay? Right. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
It does seem though that even though the unpleasant feelings are optional, that having them a little bit more prominent in this session is kind of useful in as much as when you're going through that, you can kind of you don't despair as easy. It's just kind of
sure. It is, yeah. That's very true, and because it is a reality when we're practicing, and so sometimes it can get a bit depressing. There's that spiritual depression, and you're like, oh, meditation's supposed to be peaceful and stuff, and when's that going to happen? Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you that all you need to do is focus on the breath and you get pleasure, but it's focusing on the breath that is the issue. So I had a painful feeling come up the other day, and I'm so happy to have this painful feeling. It's so easy to focus on the painful feeling compared to the beginning stages of breath meditation where I tend to get distracted a lot.
Yeah. So what happened then?
I just had a great time with my pain.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent. Okay, well that's good. Well, you're a mother, so you know, get used to it. No, yeah, sure. And if you know, see, the thing is, and one of the reasons why that's useful is that then if you're not afraid of painful feeling, you're also not going to be so infatuated with pleasant feeling. You know, so these things always come together. The wisdom will always be there, no matter what you're doing. Yeah.
Do you just use the breath meditation for one part in the states? So you do the meditations in the normal state, you do them in the sort of mindful state, and you use the breath meditation for other states.
Kind of.
And there's deeper states that just really go where it goes.
Yeah. Kind of.
To enlighten this, you need to anchor in someone's saying, you don't need to be an anchor on it.
The which one, sorry?
It's Thursday, isn't it?
What day is it today? Is it Thursday? It's Thursday, okay.
Yeah, it seems to be a fair bit.
Well,
I'm just going with the flow.
oh, I know, yeah.
Yeah, someone saying that.
So we got Friday and Saturday, yeah.
Next to concept.
Just so I can understand it as well. It's clear we're discussing all the things and what is happening. Well, this whole thing has a milestone, so say for the first one, when you observe it, right, you visible to that, move to the next one. Working that way, body, work away. Next one.
I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
And all these things that we discussed, observing the feeling, observing the attention to the positive and stuff.
Right.
All those points, are they considered milestones?
As milestones?
Yeah, in the normal meditation. So once you do that, you move to the next one, or you can just like the shortcut.
No, well, think of it more like a framework rather than a milestone. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, yes, they can be milestones. You know, you can realise, oh, actually, you know, when you're meditating and that pleasant feeling comes, and that wasn't there before, and so there's a certain letting go of hindrances, so that marks, right? But generally speaking, it's a framework. You know? So it's something that gives you a way of orientating and guiding your practice. It's not like something you sort of achieve step by step.